I did put together a Memorial Day thing. I went to the St. Mary's Cemetery to visit with Bob Dodd, who'd been our attorney for many years. He had been priest and a mayor and a philosopher, and he did an awful lot of pro bono work for us. And so when I visited, I was also visiting the other graves in that fairly small Catholic cemetery, sitting on top of a moraine. And so I put together a bunch of pictures there that I thought I would put into a slideshow, and we'll make a link that you can get hold of. So we run through the different people that were there. Some of them are very much friends and relatives. Mike and Molly's father was there just recently. But there's priestly people, there are academic people, there are people from different countries and different disciplines. And the symbology for the people that are there is very different. Sometimes it's very mixed. You might have a Greek revival symbol mixed with something that's more modern. And so we will have to wait till we get a link for that. But that will be up on TV and on YouTube. So we have Tom Bruno, and he may even have some background. Where does your name come from? Where you have some heritage?
My grandparents, my paternal grandparents, both came over from Italy and were born near Naples. And my maternal grandparents both came over from the Czech Republic. So all four of my grandparents were European-born immigrants. I'm half Czech and half Italian. Wow. My parents were both born in the United States.
Oh. Interesting. And you came to the Midwest?
My father grew up in Connecticut. My mother grew up in Chicago. And they met when they were both serving in the military during World War II. My mother was in the Waves. My father was in the Army Air Force. And they met at a dance in Springfield, Massachusetts. And here I am. They moved. My father moved to the Midwest, where his wife was from, and I grew up in the Chicago suburbs.
So, yes, we have
So that's my background.
Yes. So
came down here to Champaign-Urbana from the western suburbs of Chicago at the age of 18 to go to the University of Illinois, and never went home again. So
I came from Australia.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Didn't ever go home again. And that was some of the things you feel at the cemetery is that a lot of the people that there came and would never go back to where they came from. And so you have a leg in two different places.
There you go.
So, I asked you to come because we have a lot of projects that bridge a lot of people. And you have a Champaign First organization, sort of loosely put together, but I liked that you reported our city meeting. You reported on going to Washington, going to Springfield, and tell us a little bit about that and a little bit about the people that are involved.
Sure.
You're mainly administrative people.
Well, it is a loosely organized group, and it has its roots in activities that a lot of other communities in America do, where a handful of the community travel to the state seat of government or to Washington, D.C., and they make their case for projects and either legislative changes or maybe money. It always seems like people are asking for money, but sometimes we're asking for attention and legislative help.
Ideas rather than
Sure.
necessarily looking for money. Sometimes money will follow an idea.
Well, that's true, and the reality of the situation was that when the deep recession hit a few years ago, money wasn't as easy to get, but there were still other things that we could ask for help with, and we've been doing that, but also listening to what our not only our elected officials in Springfield and in Washington, D.C. have to tell us, but also highly placed people in administrative government agencies.
Yes, sometimes they're working Bibles.
Yeah, so we've met with folks from the Department of Transportation, from the FAA, from the Railway Authority, and we listen. We tell them what we want and what we hope and dream and wish for, but we also listen to their predictions of what's...
And that's helpful to them, even if the money is short. They have a bank of money to work with, and sometimes if you can give them an idea, that's
Sure. helpful
to them to know where they can put their...
Now, I know your interest tends to be more towards rails, but for instance, the Willard Airport, there was some hope of building a new control tower there. And they pointed out to us that wasn't, that was not that likely to happen.
Other communities first, the bigger ones.
Yeah, there's other needs, but that maybe what we could get in place of that is an upgrade of the electronics there that would enable flights to come in and out of Willard Airport in less than ideal weather. So we might be able to shift the focus there instead of building a new tower. The FAA. I'm going to let you talk about
federal
rails to trails and
that's
and
okay.
the environment. But the FAA does a lot of air traffic controller training at Champaign's Willard Airport. So that's a location where air traffic controllers actually receive their training on how to do it. And did you know that it's not a requirement that you have even an undergraduate college degree to be a air traffic controller?
It interests me that these are often applied sides of the air system, and it is being handed over to Parkland College, which very much fills in with
Sure.
applied situations, whether they're nursing or agriculture or small engines or training, and even that can include railroads too. But there's this balance between two major institutions.
Yes.
So it goes beyond just getting a tower or just getting signaling devices or safety devices. It includes how do we do this? How do we train people for the future?
Mm-hmm.
But you had a number of projects. You had one on 57, I
Correct.
remember, where the cloverleaf is fairly tight.
And poorly designed.
Yes.
And it's actually sloped outward, so a lot of 18-wheeler trucks tip over there.
Yes.
And every time one tips over, two interstate highways often are rerouted or shut down. We put our firefighters and our police officers at some risk because they have to go out there and stand in a highway and redirect traffic. People can get hurt, people can die, and that interchange is high on our list of priorities to have it rebuilt. But when Eisenhower proposed the National Defense Highway System, which we know as the Interstate Highway System, the government was all behind the notion of federal money helping and largely paying for a network of interstate highways that was going to help our whole nation. And that we've fallen off from that into, well, why don't you guys just pay for it yourself? Why doesn't the state of Illinois just find the money someplace? And that's contrary to Eisenhower's belief of what this would do for us as a country, to have the interconnectivity of the interstate highway system.
Yes, it's important that we had a balance between canals, which were replaced by rails, that were replaced by roads, and airlines, and there's a balance between how you encourage that at a federal level, and it's been, the railroads got money in the 1850s, but since then they haven't done that so much, and sometimes it's because the agencies involved are private. They want to be self-sufficient rather than dependent on federal money that might push them around a little bit.
Correct.
So that was that's another project. You had another project which was going out into the boondocks a little bit. Your representatives come from Mahomet, St. Joe, Rantoul, Savoy,
Sure.
as well as Champaign-Urbana, and so one was to connect trails in
Yes.
the Mahomet area, and then you had another connector which was sort of extension of Prospect Avenue in Savoy.
Correct.
And then another one, a major one, was, and you are somewhat involved, I think, is Fast Track.
Sure.
And we're aware that there's a nominal fast track from Chicago to St. Louis. But make some comments about that,
Sure.
because
Well,
I think
you
it
know-
interests you. You've been to Europe to look at rail beds. You've looked at interurbans around town, trams, and all sorts
I
of
travel a lot, and I really am jealous of the rest of the world and what wonderful things they've done with rail, passenger rail, in the last 50 years, while we have sat here on our hands and done precious little. So with the advent of increased airline security, it became really cumbersome to board an airplane, rightfully so, I suppose, but the process of going through security and loading an airplane has become much more difficult. And railway travel really can solve that under 750-mile trip, under 500-mile trip, Champaign to Indianapolis, Champaign to Cincinnati, to Milwaukee. Those ought to be taken on high-speed rail. What happened then, there's this notion that this line from Chicago through Springfield and Bloomington Normal and on to St. Louis, they tried to get above the 79-mile-an-hour speed limit up to maybe 110-mile-an-hour speed limit. But they continue to share the track with...
Sharing the track is a problem.
With freight.
Yes, they put in two tracks.
They continue to have grade crossings, but they have better gates and things like that. And well, that's just such a...
Yeah, they were putting in overpasses.
There are some of them, but it's not what we needed. What we really needed, and what we've been advocating, the Champaign County First program has been advocating for 5 or 6 years now, is true high-speed rail, 220-mile-an-hour high-speed rail, on a dedicated railway line that was only passenger. And we have the right of way because we used to have 2 tracks from here to Chicago, but we pulled up those second set of rails and sold them for steel scrap in the 1980s. And
liquid gold.
But the right of way is still there, and the undeveloped land is still there. So we're a natural.
We're a little jealous of the underdeveloped land because it's the only place where there's any prairie left.
Sure.
So that corridor to Chicago is a valuable asset.
It is, for many reasons.
So there's also roads on it. If you go through from Rantoul to Paxton, for instance, there's a concrete road. It's the old Route 45, which gives you access to, and it's probably 200 feet wide rather than 100 feet wide, which is the average railroad. It was interesting that this week we had a Chinese lady at a seminar, a railroad seminar that I go to, and she was in charge of fast tracks in China, and they're extending into the boondocks. They're doing local stuff. They put their freight on. They maintain the freight. The freight lines have to be working, so they can't just take the passengers off the freight and passenger combined. They have to keep the freight organized. They also have to have stops where people can get off and use the local. So there has to be local stuff. They do a lot of their traveling on fast track at night. They have sleepers, and people that they work out that saves a lot of money, a lot of people's time.
Sure.
And so they're working at night. They're also thinking to extend to across the continent to places like India or to Vietnam and places outside of their country, like from in Brazil across the rainforest to Peru. So they're taking these railroads to other places, and they have developed a lot of skills that the U.S. has been very clever at over the years. They sort of didn't put railroads in until other countries had sampled.
Sure.
And so you're coming in, by coming in late, you can pick and choose the things that you want to do. One of the major problems you have locally is that you don't have the population of people that China has. And you also have to think about the airlines. The puddle jumpers from Willard to
Sure.
Chicago are picking up people who could be on trains.
In fact, Lufthansa has a system in Germany where the train leg is just like one more leg of your air journey.
Yes.
So you check your baggage if you have checked luggage, and the final leg of your journey is on a high-speed train. So you can go, point A to point B to point C, and then point D is reached by high-speed rail. So if we had high-speed rail that reached from O'Hare Airport to maybe the McCormick Place area in Chicago, to Champaign and on to St. Louis.
The airlines do that a little bit with the airport in Chicago. The train runs into the airport.
Well, the CTA, or what I would call the CTA, Metra.
Yeah.
But imagine getting off your flight, San Francisco to Chicago, walking through the terminal building, getting on high-speed rail, and coming to Champaign in 42 more minutes. And then get out here and your bag greets you, and it's all booked and paid for through United Airlines. It would be a really nice deal.
Yes. Then you have to think of those short lines. People like Roberts and Urbana have been encouraging the thoughts about the Norfolk Southern, which runs through Champaign to Urbana and is not very well used. Could that be a trolley car that would go perhaps Champaign, Campus, Urbana, but it could extend to Mahomet and to St. Joe.
You've got some listeners, I'm sure, on this program who maybe don't recall the effort that this community made towards a fixed guideway rail system in 2003. But I was a fairly strong advocate of that. And
we had a thing called Big Small All.
Yes, and that was a great...
You and others were presenting at this.
And the fixed guideway rail line that would serve downtown Champaign, downtown Urbana, maybe out to the university's athletic facilities, go down Green Street, go down White Street, a little bit of Wright Street, get from the courthouse and the Lincoln Square area in downtown Urbana to downtown Champaign in 5 or 6 minutes on a smooth, quiet, electric train. So we went to Portland, Oregon, and looked at a system there. It was very successful. And every stop along the way...
Denver has one too.
Oh, they have them all over. Yeah. And when you stay in a hotel in Portland, Oregon, the souvenir postcard on the counter that you're to mail home is about the rail system. It's about the fixed guideway, the tram system, because it's the thing that's so successful and they're so proud of, and it has spurred economic development along the route. And we were on the verge of doing it here in this community when some old-fashioned thinkers killed the idea by mocking it a lot. We had a study session at the Champaign City Council. We have these informal study sessions where the vote was 9-0 to support the high-speed, not high-speed, but the fixed guideway tram system in Champaign. We voted 9-0. And then the folks at Penny for Your Thoughts started mocking it on the radio, and our mayor at the time started mocking it, and he had voted yes for it at the study session, but pretty soon the idea became that this was a boondoggle, and we didn't need it. We had cars.
Well, one of the comments from the Chinese angle was that if you put a railroad through a city, it takes up much less room than if you put a clover leaves and roads.
Well, the other economic development aspect of a fixed guideway tram system is there's rails in the street, and people know that's way more permanent than a bus route. Yeah. And so you can open up a new restaurant or an insurance store or florist shop because that subway, that tram line's not moving anywhere, not likely. And so you can make investment based upon the fact that, oh, my new coffee shop is on the tram line. In Portland, Oregon, the businesses along the tram line sponsor the bus stops, and they pay. So the announcement that comes over the tram car is, we're at the Mike and Molly stop, and it's referred to that way. And Mike and Molly's pays a little bit to the system, and the stop is named after them. And imagine going from the Mike and Molly stop to the Picara Bakery stop to the Dunkin' Donuts stop and on to the courthouse. It makes so much sense. And we would have been out ahead of the game, and we would have had it for our community here. But some old school thinkers who think that we have cars, why don't we just drive cars, killed the idea.
Yes.
One of my biggest regrets.
We have sort of assumed that we have to have freight and people on the same business, but we also need to care about the freight. At the moment, we have a huge yard, which is called a humping yard because you put together trains by sorting them out and pushing them around, which it means that you can't handle things like delicate equipment like computers and the like. Whereas if you put them on an intermodal train with a crane, a gantry crane, you can move stuff around. The train never disconvolulates. Mm-hmm. You lift it off with a pod.
I remember you coming to the city council and talking about rolls of newsprint from the News Gazette's printing plant up in the Apollo subdivision to the downtown here, that they could somehow move rolls of newsprint from the Amtrak line, or not Amtrak, but the Canadian National line to the printing plant.
So you integrate these two things. You don't make them be on the same track. Although sometimes it's interesting, the Europeans, as far as I can see, when they close down the people movers at night, they take the freight into Campustown on rail. So there is a balance here. And unfortunately, what you're referring to is the old guard has been oriented to having both on the same track. And that doesn't always work. We're kind of interested in how you keep the rails afloat so that you could bring historic trains from Monticello in from Whiteheath to Seymour to Bonneville to Champaign. We, unfortunately, the track we would have brought them in on has been taken out some, but
it's hard to imagine that if you told a person from anywhere else in the world that you can't get from Champaign-Urbana, a county with 170,000 people, you can't get from here to Indianapolis on a passenger train. It's sinful. I mean, you can't go east and west from here.
So in that case, we do have 25 miles from Urbana to Danville, which is on a rail banking act. The Congress got to the point where they were taking out so many railroads, you couldn't get military across the country. Then they were beginning to think that this is not wise. So they've watched the bicycle people who were they were buying abandoned railroads. They had some problems because there were titles to deal with. So you'd come to a reversionary title and you'd have to go 5 miles around to get to the other side. And there was a problem that when you abandon a railroad, by mandate, the bridges are removed because somebody might drop off a 160 feet high bridge and commit suicide or what have you. So the bridges were taken out. To put them back is like a $2 or $3 million job. So the Rail Banking Act decided that if you could get together with the railroad and get together with the local agency that would want to buy it, and with Surface Transportation, which is the federal Department of Railroad, Department of Transportation, then the additional goodie was that enhancement money was given you to make the track into a trail, and it was an interim trail. It could come back into action. So I have to remind the people who are working with the track from Urbana to Danville that it is rail banked. We took it out as a rail banking. And if you are looking at Chicago, Bloomington, St. Louis, then it's fairly logical for that Norfolk Southern line that comes through to Urbana to continue to Danville and continue to Crawfordsville, and is active line into Indianapolis. There are other ways of getting around, but you have to figure that population problem. You have a population in Champaign. You're trying to increase that population because you have a C2B, infrastructure for fiber optics, and a huge computer over there at the university. And can you have Silicon Valley people here? So a lot of things are interacting. One of them, which worries me a lot, is that if you invite someone from San Francisco to come here with a small industry, where is your public recycling? I dumpster dive for years, and it's amazing to me what is intended to go 35 miles to a landfill and stay there as an ingot of aluminum or plastic that leaches. And so we've had a lot of problems with those sorts of things. What interests me with the group of people you have together here loosely as a Champaign First is that you're starting to look at more broadly some of these things, so that it doesn't get railroads and roads and canals and airways.
Well, what I will tell you about a trip like this, and I've done it now 5 or 6 years of, I think we've been going for 7 years, I maybe missed 1 or 2 of them, is on this past trip 2 or 3 weeks ago, the mayor of Urbana, the mayor of Champaign, the mayor of Mahomet, the mayor of Savoy, the administrator from Rantoul, we're all traveling together. So as we're walking or taking the subway from our meeting at the Surface Transportation Board to maybe our meeting at the FAA, we're talking to each other. We're making observations. You walk 2 or 3 blocks, you break up into a group of 3 people and another group of 4 people, and we're bouncing ideas off each other, and we're talking about what we just heard at that last meeting and manipulating ideas. And then maybe you're in the airport departure lounge waiting to come home after 2 days of doing this, and you're sitting next to somebody from another city, another village, talking. It's so healthy for good government and for good policy from Champaign County.
This happened in 206.
Yes.
Big, Small, All attracted a huge number of people. I think they were amazed. But it gradually sorted itself out till it got to be back to the roots that were there originally.
Yeah, I think sometimes people could see a process like that and think it's an opportunity for them to get what they want or to manipulate the outcome of the process. It was a noble idea, and it had the community talking. It's great to do those kinds of things. And, you know, every 2 years, the Champaign City Council has a council goal-setting session. It usually takes a couple of nights, maybe spread out over a couple of weeks. and we just sit around and we've had facilitators help us with the process, and there's kind of nothing. Everything's on the agenda, and we talk and maybe put sticky notes up on the wall, and at the end of the evening, we come away with Champaign City Council goals for the next 2 years, for the next 5 years, and then the staff of 600 or so that work for the city of Champaign can always reference things back to what's our big picture goals. We're not dealing with just fighting fires, everything everything on an ad hoc basis as an emergency comes up. We have some vision, some long-term plans. Frankly, some of those discussions shocked me. I thought I would look at one of my colleagues on the city council and think, seriously, you think that's important? And so you learn as well when you have these discussions.
Yes, I've just sat in on a number of these.
So sometimes it's fascinating what other people think.
I can remember one on South First Street where this was in process.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the school district.
Okay.
And how it integrates with the railroads. Peter B., who is a mechanic of note, who works with Parkland College with automobile engines and small and has done a lot of that sort of work. So he's interested more generally. I talked to him just this week, and he was looking at a distribution center at near the Champaign. It's near the Champaign post office. Behind, it's a big center
west of the large Champaign post office at Madison, Bloomington Road.
And he was wondering if that could be a high school, and I would think that would be a wonderful idea. I think I would feel that most of Champaign would want a new high school if they're going to get a new high school. But this would be a recycled high school. This would be an and I think you would get money from people who are supporting environmental issues that are recycled.
Well, let me make some comments about that. For one thing, I'm very sensitive. I'm not on the school board. It's a different unit of government.
Yes.
And so I'm very sensitive not to second-guess decisions that the school board has made, because I know sometimes you get so much information. I get so much information about a Champaign City Council issue, and I think, well, really, I wouldn't want the school district weighing in on it and saying, here's what you ought to buy for your new fire truck. I'm thinking, well, maybe you should study this binder of materials.
Airing the idea.
Sure. But here would be my first observations about that. It's noble to reuse a building, but I think sometimes the amount that you would save by virtue of the fact that there's already a shell there, if you had to convert it into a high school, a builder or a developer might say, it's just way more difficult to try to save the shell of that warehouse than to that shell's not the expensive part. The expensive part is the classrooms and the walls and to try to retrofit.
But any recycling project costs more than to buy it new.
Correct, but
you're doing something different, and that's what would interest me. And there's a railroad right alongside, and there's Parkland College. So the students that get to have one leg in the Parkland College and doing joint programs and perhaps doing industrial things could almost walk to...
Okay, but let me... I'm all for recycling an aluminum beverage can, but I wouldn't expect it to go back and have somebody strip the paint label off of it and try to relabel the can that's already a cylinder and clean up the pop top and affix a new pop top to it, because the most efficient way to recycle that aluminum beverage can is to crush it into a little bit of aluminum and then build a new can from scratch. So when we recycle a warehouse into a high school, you also need to ask ourselves, is starting with that warehouse going to be more energy efficient and more useful than saying it's easier to start from scratch and put a skin around a brand new building.
Well, box buildings are not really designed for permanency. They're big and empty, and yes,
So I don't know.
I agree with you.
The devil is in the details.
Yes.
But we had the same thing with Burnham City Hospital when there were some talk about, why don't we reuse that? Well, it had been an old city hospital building, and the interior was a lot of little tiny patient rooms. And the rehab of taking those rooms apart and trying to make something meaningful out of that building would have been way more expensive and not necessarily worth it, because because it didn't lend itself to modern hospitals aren't laid out that same way anymore. And
so even if you were to acquire, as I understand it, that distribution center has moved out, and it is partially occupied, but not as intensively as it was intended. What if you knock it down and locate a high school right there, where you have the interurban situation that we've been talking about?
Well, and that's where I say I am not in a position to comment on the wisdom of that, because I don't have all the details, and I don't want to step on the toes of the people who are elected to serve on the school board.
Oh,
but
yes, that's why we've got you here.
I step on a lot of toes in life anyway. But you know what? As this community is going to have to rally around some new solution to our high school issue, we need to have every idea like this thoroughly vetted and talked about and said, here's why it might work, here's what the costs would be, here's what the advantages and disadvantages would be. We can't leave anything unexamined merely because at first blush we thought it wasn't worth examining.
But it's a tremendous amount of work for someone like, if you were to ask Peter B. to put together a plan for this, that's a half a year of work.
So you need to know how far is what's a reasonable amount of investigation before you can cross something off the list and say.
So you can do it by the seat of your pants, but there's the next step up.
Right. So we do this. I'm very interested in economic development for Champaign County, and we always want to be we want to be a survivor when some company or investor in a distant place is looking at a new location for employment or industrial development or whatever, and there's a list of 100 possible cities. We want to make the cut and stay on that list as long as possible. But the developer's idea is, I've got to whittle these 100 down to 95. I got to get rid of the 95 bad ones as fast as I can, because I can't research 100 different locations. So we want to survive that cut and get down to the one that they start really doing some serious research on. So with citing a new high school or solving the high school problem, they probably would like to get down to 2 or 3 options pretty fast. But we as a community don't want to see them go from 20 options to 3 options if somewhere in those 17 that are going to end up on the cutting room floor is the good idea that might have been a community solution.
Yeah, let me look at the clock. The time goes very quickly.
When I'm here talking.
Every week it goes so fast.
This might be a good time to make a quick intervention here to mention that you're listening to WEFT Champaign 90.1 FM, and it is May the 31st. So if you're listening in the future, that's the date of this original broadcast. And yes, Dave Monk is talking with Tom Bruno from the Champaign City Council.
That's good.
He scared me when he said we were going to have an intervention. I thought maybe it's something I did.
I guess I meant interruption. Sorry, wrong word. It's live radio.
That's often a problem. We mentioned before, it's the idea often that's more important than the money.
Sure.
And often when you go to present an idea to an organization, the first thing is, we have no money. Like, end of conversation. But that's not why you're there. You're there to debate. You go to the planner and say, I have this idea. I don't know whether it's germane or not. But the question sometimes is, what do you want? What I want is his expertise or her expertise. So at the moment, we're looking at an abandonment of 3 miles of railroad bed. So I went to the city to ask about that, and I asked to meet with the mayor, and it's outside of your jurisdiction. But I'm looking at Champaign, and a lot of the things you're talking about are outside your jurisdiction, so you can go outside your jurisdiction if you want. But that's a major question.
Well, things affect the city of Champaign.
You got to,
Things affect the city of Champaign that are sometimes outside of our jurisdiction. It still is of interest to us, and we, for instance, the airport, the University of Illinois Airport at Willard, has a tremendous impact on the city of Champaign.
Everyone's going to Bloomington.
Yeah, but not so much anymore. The fares at Bloomington have rapidly shot up now that Frontier is. There's been some airline changes, so price out your next trip. Yeah, Champaign is relatively more competitive now because Bloomington got more expensive when they're discount carriers, and Bloomington has always had the advantage of us that they tax the citizens of Bloomington and Normal for an airport authority. So average homeowner on a modest home in Bloomington might pay $50 a year on the real estate tax bill. Well, you do that and you got enough money to run the airport and do some things at the airport that we don't have in Champaign. So we could always, create an airport authority, but the devil is in the details. So
Yes.
It looks real good to look over at Bloomington and say, why can't we be like them? Well, do we want to create an airport authority and raise $1 million a year?
Well, yes, we have the same problem at Clinton, where in order to put a 5-mile rail trail in that joins 2 state parks that are quite popular, we have to have a park district. But the park district requires tax base. And if the county doesn't want that tax base, then it's hard to get your park district. So it's exactly what you're saying. And Champaign hasn't got to the point where they want to.
Well, frankly, if we had a serious discussion about creating an airport authority, I might be arguing that's a great idea for Champaign. But we don't have that right now.
Yes.
But we do have some very interesting research that I heard recently about our airport that dispelled a lot of the myths that the community has about the impact of free parking and the price of parking. It turns out that the researchers who've really looked at that question have determined that people don't. The leakage, which is the term of Champaign County residents who fly out of other airports, is not very much about parking charges. It has very little to do with it.
Yes, I just got an alumni publication from Sydney University, and one of the things that a professor in charge of mystique and breaking down mystique. So how much of the population do you think gets involved at this level? It seems to be that we could have more of the population involved.
Sure.
That means that they have to have a little time. Is it getting to the point where we're having a little bit of leisure time? How do we encourage the thinking process that you were talking
I'll tell
about?
you, it's shows like yours on local, not-for-profit radio that provide something for people. Everybody who's listening to this show is learning more about their local community than the other folks who might be sitting on the couch this morning watching some national television program about something else. So I applaud people who find it in their interest to take their free time and watch a tape replay of a city council meeting, listen to a program like this, read the local papers, read the online local magazines and discussions. That's really good. It's really interesting.
I think it's happened a lot with the internet. We are able to access information in a much different way. And we're even worried about that with a radio station, because a lot of the information, maps, charts, are visual things. Mm-hmm. And we think that as WILL has a visual side, so should radio stations like this have a visual side to them, because
Sure.
that's where your cell phones are. That's where.
Well, I guess years ago, the option was either you were a television station or you were a radio station, and the investment in becoming a television station was prohibitive. But now there is a possibility of a hybrid where you can be a not-for-profit radio station with an internet presence where visual materials can be blended with the talk and visible on the internet.
I can go to a city meeting and I can take something that can be spread on a screen or
Sure.
made public.
Well, and you do that, and good for you. But we have when people have a cause that they're interested in, they should come to a city council meeting, take advantage of the moment we give people to make public comment at the conclusion. We do it before each and every ordinance. Everything we vote on, we open it up to public comment. And then at the end of the meeting, we open it up to just general public comment on any topic
That's
whatsoever.
very, very helpful. I do go to other places where.
And you've taken advantage of it to your credit. You've come up and say, I'm Dave Monk, and here's what's on my mind. And that's a really good thing. And then we push that out over the television airwaves 21 times a week. I mean, we meet on Tuesday night, but we show that 3 times a day for the next 7 days. And so people get to see your beautiful face 21 more times with your 5 minutes of commentary on prairie land or saving or the rails to hiking trails. And it's
Banners does the same thing. In fact, they own the camera that we're using right now, and then they put it up on television twice a week,
Sure.
and then they put it up onto YouTube,
yeah.
so you can get it at any time. Can I go to Champaign and do the same thing?
Well, we have made a policy decision that we don't generally broadcast in the same way that Urbana does, individually prepared content. But we do broadcast our council meetings.
Yes.
So you certainly are welcome to come to a council meeting, take your 5 minutes, and say whatever's on your mind.
One problem I see sometimes is that the participant would be like me, have an idea, but want to know what your reaction is.
Okay.
To ask a question. You can't do that at Champaign at
What
the
a
moment.
wonderful opportunity for me to comment on why we don't do that. For one thing, we open it up to public comment, and we try to be pretty careful to say, this is your chance to say what's ever on your mind, but it's not a period of questioning. And the reason we do that is, for one thing, we're still trying to get through a meeting in a community of 80,000 people. So it's not fair for somebody to take 20 minutes with questions and answers. But even within 5 minutes, if you were to come up to that podium and say, I want to know why you didn't make Green Street 4 lanes, why you made it 3 lanes, who gets to answer that question? All 9 of us? Who do you want to hear from? Do you want to call on somebody and say, Council Member Paul Faraci, you tell me why you didn't want to do it? And what if I say, well, that wouldn't be Tom Bruno's answer, or it wouldn't be Vic McIntosh's answer. So when you come up there, who's going to get to answer your question? And do you want all 9 of us to answer?
That's why you have a staff, a very professional staff.
And you know what's wrong with, we don't want our staff. They are a professional staff. And they're usually in a position to answer a question. But what happens is it starts to become cross-examination. So what do we do when somebody comes up and says to the fire chief, why did you buy a LaFrance pumper? Didn't it cost more than a Pierce pumper? And he starts to answer the question, and you start to grill him, and you have a follow-up question.
Yeah, I
and
understand.
pretty soon we're not at a public governmental meeting anymore.
So where do you send your person that
Well, for
really
one thing,
doesn't know enough to be sure of himself or herself and to ask you questions?
well, for one thing, all 9 of us will generally gladly answer any question that's directed to us.
Yes.
Although we don't always have the answers, and staff are very good about answering the public's questions. But the other thing, a person who's feeling frustrated and really has a grievance against their government, you can come up there and you can ask a rhetorical question. And as long as you're not expecting any of the 9 of us to answer it right then and there on the spot, you could say, I'm Dave Monk, and I'm mad as heck, and I want to know why the Champaign City Council doesn't devote more of its resources to prairie preservation. And I challenge all 9 of you to tell me that. And then you go have a seat
I
back.
would like less of that challenge. I would like more of the idea that is worthwhile, that isn't gelling in somebody's head. It needs a team. Even if it's only 6 people, somehow that's what Beckman is about. That's what a lot of these communities are about.
And you have been very good at stimulating thoughtful reflection on different ways to solve problems. And, you know, when you come up there and you throw out an idea that we think is out of left field, it's always good for, because we think a lot of your ideas are out of left field. But it's always good for, you know, causing people to reflect. And maybe after the meeting, one of the 9 elected officials calls the public works director and says, what about that thing Dave Monk was talking about at the meeting Tuesday night? What about that idea? Why don't we do that?
So what
That's
about
how-
3 miles at Bonneville? How do I encourage a city of Champaign to look at a possible historic railroad coming into Champaign, perhaps a historic restaurant, warehouse, or what have you? Black Dog has come in at the old railroad station. How do we suggest that we have 2 elevator companies, perhaps have 20 elevators each? There's Top Flight, and there's, I forget the other one, is at Bonneville. How do we encourage you to talk to Surface Transportation and Canadian National to preserve that 3 miles intact, so that in future, when we re-rail 4 miles that we own between Whiteheath, how do we talk to you and suggest that you call Washington?
If I were your political advisor, I would say you contact the 7 members of the Urbana City Council and you say, here's why this is important to Urbana, and here's why Urbana ought to get interested in it. You contact the 9 Champaign City Council members and you say, I know this is outside of your city limits, but here's why it's important to Champaign. and then you contact the Champaign County Chamber of Commerce and the Convention and Visitors Bureau, now known as Visit Champaign, or the Economic Development Corporation, and you say, here's why this is important to your organization, and here's why you ought to get behind it. And you start to bring up a community consciousness about a desired project through all those various local organizations. Maybe you ask somebody at the Rotary Club or the Kiwanis Club or something, are you looking for speakers? I'd like to come and speak to your group for 20 minutes one day about this Bonneville Rail project. And then you've got 100 people in the community who tell 100 more.
But I don't see so many people doing that. I want to be at a city meeting where there's more than a handful of people. I would like to see an integration somehow, and I'm not sure how to do that. We're very near the end of the time.
And that may be just the honest thing, is that not that many people are interested in it, and you've got to get them interested. Yes. The old thing about the history professor was jealous why the football coach gets paid so much. And the college president said, well, when you get 100,000 people to come to one of your history lectures, then maybe you'll get as much money as the football coach. So you've got to get your audience out there.
Well, Tom Brewer, thank you very much for coming and talking to us.
Sure.
And, we'll probably meet again sometime. And
I'm honored to have been invited, because I really appreciate the work you've done for the community.
So, well, we're still at it.
Good. It's a never-ending project.
I've been walking around a little prairie, which was a remnant prairie between Maine and 130 in Urbana, and I would like that. I went into Beringer Commons, and there's all these fairly affluent buildings, and how can we do a kickstart or something to repair that corridor that has been so decimated by lights and things? So yes, and just along the road a little bit further, there's water. The road is being raised up, and do we have a chance to know where the water goes? And so there's lots and lots of questions that we have, and that's what we do with this program. And so this has been Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champagne. And thank you to Tom Bruno and Dave on the board.
Dave on the board.
And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.